The case didn't come back to life because of a phone call, a confession, or a long-buried witness finally deciding to talk. It resurfaced because a veteran detective couldn't ignore a detail that felt wrong. In October 2018, Detective Evan Caldwell stood in a narrow municipal records office in Glendale, Missouri, flipping through digitized property files tied to unresolved missing persons cases. Caldwell had been with the county for over 25 years. He'd seen bodies pulled from rivers, shallow graves unearthed by dogs, and cold cases reopened only to die again within weeks. But the file on 3 siblings who vanished in 1998 never left him alone. Their disappearance had been logged as voluntary absence within the first year. 3 adults. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. No ransom demands. No witnesses. Just gone. 2 brothers, ages 21 and 23, and their sister, 20. Same parents. Same address. Same friend circle. Same routines. They didn't drift apart the way most siblings eventually did. They worked different jobs, but they ate together almost every night. Neighbors remembered seeing them walking to the corner store as a group. They shared a single car. If one was late, the others waited. And then, one Friday evening in the fall of 1998, they never came home. Before we head forward into today's unsettling story, please make sure you support the channel by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next case just like this one. Caldwell had been a junior detective back then, assigned briefly to assist with canvassing. The case wasn't his. Still, one detail stayed with him for 2 decades. Their apartment was spotless, almost staged. No packed bags. No emptied closets. No notes. Their wallets were missing, but their birth certificates, childhood photos, and personal keepsakes were still there. People don't erase themselves that cleanly. In 2018, Caldwell wasn't officially assigned to reopen the case. He was supposed to be digitizing records ahead of retirement. But while reviewing archived zoning documents, he noticed something odd. A property on the edge of Maplewood, just outside Kirkwood, had changed hands multiple times between 1999 and 2017, more than normal for the area. The building wasn't residential. It had once been a small private storage facility, converted briefly into office space, then abandoned, then sold again. What caught his attention wasn't the sales history. It was the note buried in a 2002 inspection report. Unidentified odor reported by adjacent tenants. Source undetermined. Case closed. Caldwell stared at the screen longer than he meant to. Unidentified odor cases weren't rare. Most ended up being mold, dead animals, or sewer backups. But this one bothered him because the complaint came 4 years after the siblings vanished, and the building sat less than 3 miles from their last known address. He printed the report. Then another. And another. 3 separate odor complaints over a 6-year span. Different tenants. Same vague conclusion. Same building. No follow-ups. No deep inspections. The property had never been searched in connection to the disappearance. By the time Caldwell drove out to Maplewood, the sun was already low. The building stood behind a chain-link fence, its windows boarded, paint peeling, the sign long gone. The city had scheduled it for partial demolition within the month. A younger officer met him there, expecting a quick walkthrough. What they found wasn't quick. Inside, the air was thick and stale, the kind that clung to the back of the throat. The main floor was empty, dust, debris, and old wiring. But Caldwell noticed something strange along the far wall. A sealed access panel that didn't match the original blueprints. It was newer than the rest of the structure. The officer pried it open. Behind it was a narrow service crawlspace that dropped into a reinforced sublevel, something the building wasn't supposed to have. Caldwell's pulse picked up. Unauthorized structural changes almost always meant someone had something to hide. They climbed down. The smell hit them halfway down the ladder. It wasn't rot. Not exactly. It was dry, sour, and heavy, like old paper left too long in a damp basement. Flashlights swept across the floor. That's when Caldwell saw them. 3 elongated shapes, arranged side by side, wrapped tightly in industrial plastic and canvas. No blood. No mess. No signs of disturbance. Just deliberate placement. The officer beside him froze. Caldwell stepped closer, heart hammering, stomach already twisting. He reached out, gloved hand trembling, and peeled back a corner of the wrapping. Bone. White. Brittle bone. A human rib. The realization landed all at once, violent and overwhelming. Caldwell staggered backward, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. He barely made it to the ladder before he vomited, the sound echoing in the confined space. 3 bodies. Not dumped. Not buried. Stored. Forensic teams worked through the night. By morning, there was no doubt. Dental records confirmed what Caldwell already knew. The remains belonged to the 3 siblings who vanished 20 years earlier. But what shocked investigators wasn't just where they were found. It was how. There were no signs of a struggle on the bones. No defensive fractures. No bullet holes. No obvious trauma. Whoever did this hadn't rushed. They had planned. And they had hidden the bodies somewhere no one thought to look, right under a building people walked past every day. As Caldwell watched the evidence being catalogued, one question refused to leave his mind. If the siblings had been placed there so carefully, who had access to this building in 1998, and why had no one ever noticed them again? Because, as the investigation would soon reveal, the building's past was far darker than anyone realized, and someone out there had gone 20 years without making a single mistake. And the closer Caldwell looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a disappearance. It was a disappearance that had been maintained. The moment the remains were confirmed as the missing siblings, Detective Evan Caldwell knew the case would never be quiet again. Within 48 hours, the small evidence room in Glendale turned into a controlled storm. Boxes were pulled from storage. Old photographs were scanned. Cassette tapes, some so degraded they barely played, were digitized. Officers who had retired years ago were called back in, some reluctantly, others eager to finally close a chapter that had haunted them. The siblings had been reported missing in November 1998. 3 days after their parents realized something was wrong. Their mother had told police the same thing over and over. They wouldn't leave without telling us. Not all 3. Not like that. At the time, investigators had quietly disagreed. The siblings were adults. All 3 were legally capable of leaving on their own. There were no signs of forced entry at their apartment in Kirkwood. Their shared car was gone. No neighbors reported screams or arguments. And within weeks, a theory took hold, one that would define the case for years. They had left together. Maybe for work. Maybe to start over. Maybe because they were hiding something. It was an easy explanation. Too easy. Caldwell reviewed their final known movements carefully. The brothers worked staggered shifts at 2 different warehouses. Their sister held a part-time clerical job while taking night classes. None of them had given notice. None had withdrawn large sums of money. Their bank accounts went dormant within days of their disappearance. Their car was found 2 weeks later. Abandoned. Parked behind a closed strip mall in Afton, keys still inside. No fingerprints other than their own. No damage. No explanation. At the time, police treated it as evidence of a voluntary disappearance gone wrong, or a group decision that spiraled out of control. Now, 20 years later, that theory collapsed under the weight of one undeniable fact. The siblings never left the county. Someone had kept them close. As forensic anthropologists worked to determine approximate dates of death, Caldwell turned his focus to the building where the bodies had been found. In 1998, it wasn't abandoned. It was leased. The records showed the property had been rented to a private contractor, a man who ran a small logistics and storage operation. Nothing flashy. No criminal record. No major red flags. He had access to the building 24 hours a day and had overseen minor renovations the same year the siblings vanished, including reinforcement work to the sublevel. That detail alone made Caldwell uneasy. But there was a bigger problem. The contractor had died in 2007. Heart attack. Closed book. If he was involved, he'd taken his secrets to the grave. Still, Caldwell wasn't ready to let it go. He dug deeper into the siblings' lives in the months leading up to their disappearance. That's when the cracks began to show. Friends described the siblings as close, but also tense. Protective of each other to the point of secrecy. They avoided discussing certain topics. Conversations would shut down when outsiders joined in. One former coworker recalled an argument between the oldest brother and an unknown man in a parking lot weeks before the disappearance. Another neighbor remembered a car idling outside the apartment late at night more than once. None of it had been followed up in 1998. Back then, it was dismissed as coincidence. Now, it looked like warning signs. The autopsy reports added another layer of unease. While no clear cause of death could be determined due to the condition of the remains, toxicology revealed trace chemical residues on the bones, substances commonly used in industrial settings, not household environments. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was controlled, calculated. Someone had known how to prevent decomposition. Someone who worked around chemicals. Someone with access to a secured structure. Caldwell circled back to the contractor's business. And that's when he found the detail that made his stomach sink. In 1998, the contractor had been under quiet investigation by a separate county agency for suspected involvement in illegal transport of restricted materials. The case never went anywhere, lack of evidence, jurisdictional confusion, but one thing stood out. The siblings' apartment complex sat directly along one of the contractor's known transport routes. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces didn't just fit. They locked. The prevailing theory shifted. What if the siblings had seen something? What if they had been in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and all three were eliminated to ensure silence? But that theory raised a chilling question. Why keep the bodies? Why go to such lengths to preserve and hide them instead of disposing of them completely? The answer, Caldwell feared, was simple. Because the building itself was the hiding place. The contractor never expected anyone to look beneath it. As investigators traced the contractor's former employees and business partners, another unsettling truth emerged. The building wasn't the only one he'd modified. There were others. Across 3 nearby towns. And not all of them had been inspected. As news of the discovery spread, the families of the siblings were finally contacted. Their parents, now elderly, listened in stunned silence as Caldwell explained what had been found. Their children hadn't abandoned them. They hadn't chosen to disappear. They had been taken. But justice was still painfully out of reach. The primary suspect was dead. Physical evidence was degraded. Witness memories were fractured by time. And worst of all, there was no definitive proof that the contractor had acted alone. Because buried in the case files was one final, overlooked detail from 1998. A name. Not a suspect. Not a witness. Just a name written in the margin of a patrol officer's notebook. Someone who had been seen entering the building the week the siblings vanished. Someone who, according to records, was still alive. And had never been questioned. The name in the margin didn't jump out at first. It wasn't circled. There were no arrows pointing to it. Just a single line of handwriting squeezed between timestamps and license plate numbers, written by a patrol officer who had long since retired. But Detective Evan Caldwell couldn't look away from it. The individual had been logged as being seen near the Maplewood building 2 days before the siblings vanished. Not breaking in. Not acting suspiciously. Just entering the property after hours, using a key. At the time, it meant nothing. In 2018, it meant everything. The person was not the contractor. Not an employee either. Records identified him as a temporary subcontractor, someone hired briefly during a renovation phase and then quietly released. No termination paperwork. No exit interview. Just gone from the books. Caldwell tracked him down in less than a week. He was living under the same name, in the same county, 20 years older and outwardly unremarkable. Married. Employed. No criminal record. No obvious reason to be afraid of the police. When Caldwell sat across from him in the interview room, the man appeared calm, too calm. He remembered the building. He remembered working there. He denied knowing the siblings. Denied ever going into the sublevel. Denied noticing anything unusual. But when Caldwell casually mentioned the unauthorized structural reinforcement beneath the property, the man's jaw tightened. Just for a second. It was enough. Investigators searched his past thoroughly. Employment gaps. Financial records. Phone logs from 1998, to the extent they still existed. Nothing concrete tied him directly to the crime scene. And that was the problem. The case had aged beyond the point where proof was easy. The siblings' remains told a story, but not the whole story. The chemical residues suggested knowledge, not identity. The building suggested access, not guilt. And the suspect? He was careful. Always had been. Caldwell believed, deep down, that the contractor hadn't acted alone. The level of planning suggested help. Someone to assist. Someone to keep quiet. Someone who understood how to hide something in plain sight. Someone who had succeeded. As weeks turned into months, the case stalled again, not from lack of effort, but from lack of evidence strong enough to survive court. The parents of the siblings attended every briefing. Every update. Their relief at finally knowing where their children were was tangled tightly with fresh grief. They asked the question Caldwell dreaded most. Why? There was no clean answer. No motive that could be proven beyond speculation. No confession. No final piece that brought everything together. The official ruling listed the deaths as homicides by unknown persons. The building was demolished soon after, the sublevel destroyed, the last physical hiding place erased. The suspect walked free. Still does. And Caldwell retired 6 months later, the case files stacked neatly in a box he refused to throw away. Even now, the disappearance of the 3 siblings remains one of the county's most unsettling mysteries, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. No murder weapon. No timeline. No definitive cause of death. Just 3 lives erased, preserved, and hidden beneath a structure no one questioned for 2 decades. The siblings had done everything together. And in the end, they were taken together. Whoever did it knew them well enough to control them, knew the area well enough to hide them, and knew the system well enough to let time do the rest. To this day, the person or people responsible have never been named. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly how 3 young adults vanished in 1998. And how they managed to keep the truth buried for 20 years. Was this a crime of silence? Or did someone get away with a perfect cover-up for 20 years? Drop your theory in the comments, every detail, every suspicion, and every thoughts. And if stories like this keep you thinking long after the video ends, support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next case. Your support is what keeps these stories alive.